So, yeah, I have been interested and inspired by these six for a while. In fact, probably over the last year or two, it's been my sort of often first choice if I was doing a presidential visit or visiting a group. Like, I remember one time I was in Brussels visiting the group, the French-speaking group there. And I think that was in December. I spoke on the emphases. It was just a great sort of evening, a great way to communicate something of the flavour of Triratna, sometimes to people who just come along to learn meditation. So it's always worked as a way, just simply talking about the six distinctive emphases as a way of presenting something of the flavour and of our centres. Of course, here we're concerned not just to talk about them, but how to actualise them. But yeah, actually I hadn't sort of thought of that obvious point. I'm sure you would have, but one of the things to do is, well, as Bhante said, actually, to Mokshananda, when Mokshananda kind of ambushed Bhante in November last year, I looked at the clip on Video Sangha last night. It's, I think it's a 10-15 minute video by Mokshananda about the college meeting in 2014. Mokshananda arranged to go and see Bhante, and Bhante at that time, yeah, he wasn't very well actually, and he was hardly seeing anybody. But he saw Mokshananda, and at one point Mokshananda presumably brought out his camera and asked Bhante if he had any sort of message for the college. And I think Bhante's first response was that he wasn't sure that he did. Probably, hadn't even thought about it, and probably wasn't that sure about appearing on video. But yeah, if you've seen the clip, it shows him saying, well, there is something, and that is, I wrote it down, if I can find it, that we might go back to what he called the good old six fundamental emphases. You might like to give some systematic attention to them again and encourage more discussion of them. And Bhante said, please don't forget, and please remind other people of them, and keep them at the back of your mind, whatever you are doing. So, yeah, so that's that. Now, going back to why the executive have arranged this, I looked at the email sent to Sadaloka that he passed on to us public preceptors who are involved on this couple of days, and the specific request was that we should touch on, firstly, or actually I think me in the introduction, but I suppose it means in the groups, touch on first of all the relationship between the current culture of the order and the culture of centres. The relationship between the current culture of the order and the culture of centres. And secondly, the changing culture of Triratna. And thirdly, practical expressions of the six emphases. So that's such a great deal for us to consider over the next couple of mornings, and I feel that I can only touch on some of those questions. And in particular, you in this room know much more about the culture of centres, particularly your centre, but presumably through the Chairs Assembly, each other's centres, at least to some extent, than on the whole I do. So, you are the experts, as it were, when you look at the culture of your centre. And the culture of the order, well, that's such a huge question, isn't it? But I thought it was a very good way to kind of frame it. We need to look at the current culture of the order and the culture of the centres, because the culture of the order will have probably the biggest impact, well, one of the biggest impacts of all on the culture of centres. Other impacts would be the culture in wider society, for example. The changing culture of Triratna, well, that's something to think about, isn't it? How is it changing? What are the factors Do we like the changes? Can we do anything about the changes? Are some of the changes like just inevitable? Are some of them not what we want? They are maybe reversible. So, just first of all, a little bit of information about where these 6 distinctive emphases come from. Well, actually, I've not been able to find where Bhante first talked about them.
We know.
When?
He first spoke to Clear Vision about them for Buddhism Today, our key stage 4 material.
Yes. Do you know what kind of year that? What year was that?
About 1997, I think.
98 or 99, I think.
Right. Well, that may solve a mystery, but in 1999, Bhante. Now, do you remember when?
I talked about it at the inauguration of one of the centres in Valencia, which would have been a bit earlier than that, and it was not the first time because he was referring to having spoken about them before.
Yes.
So I think they're from the 80s, late 80s.
Yes. Yes. Well, anyway, that will be something that maybe we could even do more research on. But what is clear, in 1999, when Bhante spoke about them at the convention, he said that he did not present them as a new list, and in fact, he said, it's in the paper that you've got. He said, I sometimes summarize these emphases under 6 headings. I don't necessarily always give them in exactly the same order. So, but on the Free Buddhist Audio, that's the first reference I could take. But maybe I could find, if anybody can find an earlier reference on Free Buddhist Audio, that would be interesting. But clearly in Bhante's mind, they go back a long way. Now, where Bhante, I know Bhante has talked about them, and a measure of the importance he gives to them. He talked, if Valencia was pre-99, I didn't know that, so definitely in Valencia.
Well, it might have been after.
It might have been after, actually, it might have been after. Yes, so definitely in Valencia. At Padmaloka in 2002, you'll find that on Free Buddhist Audio. In Manchester, Buddha Field, the first international retreat at Taraloka, in Berlin, and in Birmingham in 2007. So many times he has talked about these, so that's almost equivalent, maybe not quite equivalent to the Buddha speaking about Sila, Samadhi, Prajna, like this is a message he wants to kind of leave with us. Yeah, so now getting closer to the material itself, when Bhante presents these 6 emphases, he always starts by pointing out, in fact emphasizing, that we have much in common with other Buddhists. And this is something that in our discussion I suggest we do not skate over. What we have in common with all Buddhists is what Bhante sometimes calls the basic teachings, the general, the basic practices and teachings which all Buddhists share. I suppose one would say all Buddhists if they are clear about what it means to be a Buddhist. So I suggest that in our discussions we do need to consider whether those teachings are clear enough in the culture of our centres. Do people know those basic teachings? Have they heard them, reflected on them, meditated on them? And in particular, might it be that those teachings, the Buddhist teachings, do we ever need to do more to make sure they don't get mixed up with non-Buddhist views? So when Bhante established the movement, I would say in the West it was Christianity he was most concerned about. So if you look at his teachings, often he's actually trying to define the FWO and Buddhism as various ways in which we do not have Christian views, we do not have Christian attitudes. In India, clearly it was not to get mixed up with Hinduism. Other things, but too. So we could consider in the clarity of the basic Buddhist teachings at our centre, what might it be getting mixed up with now? So, for example, it might be Advaita Vedanta views. For example, it might be certain different ideas coming from the so-called secular mindfulness kind of area. And what else? And what do we need to do? And here I'd like to mention personally that I have recently had the good fortune actually to undertake a couple of trainings with breathwork training course. And I want to say that I have learnt a great deal, that I did 2 one-week teacher training courses with breathworks, as well as attending 2 or 3 courses myself, 8-week courses. I've learnt a great deal in terms of my meditation teaching. It has definitely informed my meditation practice. And the teaching itself, the teacher training is outstanding, outstanding. I would like to say that. At the same time, it has definitely come home to me, as it seems to me, the limitations of so-called secular mindfulness. Actually, one of the things I like about breathworks is stronger emphasis on metta. But the limitations compared to the full Triratna approach, and the limitations of scope, the limitations of vision. And so for me, that has, perhaps paradoxically, actually increased my wish to really put myself into making Triratna grow. I think it's great that there's going to be this discussion also on the, I know some people are not sure whether it's the right term, but the so-called secular mindfulness field after the emphases, including presentations, I think by Vijayamala and Vishapani. No, no, it's Sadhanandi. Okay, and discussion. So that's I thought I'd mention that because of my own personal reflections over the last year or 2. So now coming on to the 6 themselves. Ratnagosha said, of course, I'm sure we remember all the 3rd one. There's a question. Sorry? Wrong.
Depends what order you put them in.
We'll come on to the order in a moment. I want to say something about the order. First about the 6. I happened to be with Bhante actually, I think the evening after Mokshananda put that question, during the college meeting, because I was sometimes staying with him in the evenings. And Bhante was telling me, he'd said about the 6 distinctive emphases, and I said, yeah, that's really good. And he said, he said that something like he wasn't even sure whether order members, always could remember them. And I said, yeah. And then I said, yes. I said, well, let's see if I can remember them. And honestly, at that point, my mind was a complete blank. And the reason I tell you this is, first of all, I thought, well, if I can't think of them, well, sorry, Bhante, I can only get 2. That just would happen. But actually, I got all 6. And the point I'm making is, that wasn't because I remembered a list. It's because I just thought, what could they be? What might they be? And I think that says a lot about the significance of these emphases. If you think about what might be the 6 emphases, most probably, if you have the immersion in our culture, our Triratna culture, that all of you have, you would also find them. Now, Bhante, about the order does have significance. Exactly what significance, Bhante has never said in my hearing, but sometimes when he has presented them, he said that, well, I know in one talk he said that he made it a bit of a joke. He said he hoped he could remember them. Actually, that was in 2007 when he had lost his sight, and he said, well, he had written them down in large in case he forgot. But he said that sometimes he wasn't sure about the right order. Well, I've checked all the references on Free Buddhist Audio, and they're always in the same order, except sometimes the first and the third are reversed. And as far as I can tell, in the 1999, actually the reference that you have got for the study, and 2002 at Padmaloka, ecumenicism went first, and the centrality of going for refuge went third. But subsequently, as far as I know, and I think this works very well, and this is how I'm going to go through it, centrality of going for refuge will come first. And critical ecumenicism will come third, and the others are all in the same order in every one I've seen. Now, what is the significance of the order? We could consider in the groups. Obviously, they're all important. I won't comment. You could, you could think about that even as we go through. So now, coming to the first, the centrality of going for refuge. That is the first. Actually, I was thinking that in the groups we were going to have two kind of texts to go through. Another one was the one from the Birmingham Buddhist Centre, 2007, which is just one page. But anyway, I'm taking centrality of going for refuge first. It's not in that text. Well, one of the things I was reflecting on is that when Bhante gave these talks, we were the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. So these were the distinctive emphases of the FWO. Now, of course, they are the distinctive emphases of Triratna. So the name itself is now the three jewels or the three refuges. And some people feel or felt the loss of the Western emphasis in the name. But that's gone, hasn't it? But what we do have is the three jewels. And we less often talk about the three jewels as the three refuges. But they are the three refuges, aren't they? So one question that occurred to me in terms of the culture at our centres was, perhaps, I ask all these questions with due humility, because honestly I don't know what you do at your centres, and in a way I'm taking it that my job is to kind of to put questions, even so that we can collectively question and even poke ourselves. So I'm putting some pokes so that we can poke ourselves. Is there further we can go? There's no kind of suggestion that we don't necessarily do these things. But so the first question is that do we make the language of refuge sufficiently explicit at our centres? The language of refuge. And the language of refuge implies that there is no satisfaction in conditioned existence. So that implies also that we're offering something transcendent, beyond, that we're not about making samsara comfortable. And something else I thought of here around the centrality of going for refuge, because I'm not going to unpack the basic teaching because that's well known to all of us, is do we use the language of commitment sufficiently boldly? And this could connect with, are we offering sufficient challenge to attract people, or to attract the kind of people who would like challenge? And something else, so I'm going to be raising a lot of questions as we go through each one. Because the centrality of going for refuge, when Bhante talks about this, usually if he's got time, he also reminds us of the levels of going for refuge. And probably in that longer talk, he also talks about the dimensions of going for refuge. So there is so much that is fundamental here, and I would say it makes complete sense that this is the first emphasis, this is the foundation of what is particular to us, and it goes beyond, or it enables us to go more effectively and more deeply into the basic Buddhist teachings that we have in common with all Buddhists. Because of course, going for refuge is in common with all Buddhists, but the particular explication, Bhante's particular explication is Bhante's explication. Of course, it is entirely traditional when we look at the text, the centrality of going for refuge, the dimensions that going for refuge, the altruistic dimension, his tying in not only the level of real going for refuge with real going forth, stream entry, bodhicitta, turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness, and so on. But one of the things that struck me in terms of the culture of our centres, and I think this point has been made quite a lot over the last year or two or three, is that the language of going for refuge helps to broaden out our understanding of the path, so that there is no limited understanding, for example, a limited understanding in terms of individual personal insight, to take one important topical example. Just one more point about commitment is the connection between commitment and lifestyle, and the implications of commitment and lifestyle and different lifestyles. For example, family life. And if you look at the changing Triratna culture, that could be an interesting question to look at, because there was Bhante's kind of way of looking at the situation as he found it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the relationship between commitment and family life, to take that example, and the situation now. But do we sufficiently clearly show the principal relationship between commitment and lifestyle in such a way that enables people in different lifestyles to fully and deeply and effectively go for refuge, or helps them to understand how to do that and what that would mean in whatever lifestyle they are in. Okay, so now moving on to the second, a unified order. So the first point that strikes me here is that we have an order, and this order is a unique order, and one of the ways it's unique, as we know, is because it's neither lay nor monastic in its sort of envisioning. So, well, as far as possible, as we know, we would like at our centres that people to see the order and to feel the order. Now, for some centres that's more difficult than others, because there's very few order members, as we know, and particularly there's very few order members who are actually involved with the centre, but there may be very few order members even where we are. Probably some of you come from much smaller situations, looking around, at least one or two of you, or maybe more. So we know that it's not always so easy to show the order, but certainly where we're in a position to, and to the extent we are, we know that we need people to see the order, feel the order, and understand the order, understand what the order is. This is fundamental, isn't it? And obviously, we would like them to see the order harmonious, and we would like to see the order dynamic, and that means people, us, in harmony, and people, us, sort of showing dynamism, inspiration. That's one of our sort of main things we have to offer. So unified means open to all. Bhante talks about this, and in the extract that we've got, he makes a list of different groups from which people emerge to join the spiritual community. So no doubt a question in terms of a culture at our centres is, Are we doing whatever we can to create a culture where people from these different groups can feel welcome? You know, it might be class, it might be race, it might be gender, and so on. And not only can feel welcome, but because you may they may feel welcome when they come, but can they also find a path to join the order? And here, of course, very important is the two wings. And sometimes Bhante talks about this in particular, but it's not only about the two wings of men and women, women and men, but this is very important to the unified order. And I got at least a couple of points here. First of all, I think that this necessarily includes the distinctive and important practice of single sex. Well, surely it does. And it's interesting that single sex is not listed as a distinctive emphasis. Though, when I've been doing some secretarial work with Bhante over the last couple of months, and he's been asking me to go through boxes of his papers. And we came across in a file an undated list of 6 distinctive features of the FWO. And one of those is single sex. And if there's time at the end, I might mention the 15. It's quite interesting. But one of those was the single sex. But he's boiled it down to 6, actually. And when I mentioned that to him, he said, well, it's easier to remember 6. But I think that's a kind of Bhante answer, because I think there's a bit more to it than that, really. Actually, it is easier to remember 6, but I think the 6 kind of like sum up what's important. Although that is a question actually for the groups, is anything missing? I might mention 1 or 2 things about that later on. But yeah, single sex is distinctive, and I think that if we look at the unified order, it's not just a question that men and women are in the order, but men and women are in the order with a strong single-sex element. So that's something clearly for the culture of Triratna. And I was reflecting on, I gather there's a recent trend, maybe particularly shown amongst young people, to question gender identity. And I think this is, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this, and it's probably quite important to understand this. Apparently, I don't know what percentage of young people, I don't know how widely it goes, there's a questioning or people not finding the kind of the polar kind of men, what?
Binary.
The binary, that's the word, thank you. The binary male-female division, so that it fits. So certainly that something needs to be taken into account there. At the same time, I have had a few discussions over the last few years about gender in the order and movement, where some of us have sort of wondered whether there is sufficient discussion these days in the order, and presumably that could include in the chairs meeting, about men and women and the different needs and the different temperaments of men and women. It could almost be that post men, women, men and angels, I sometimes say men, women and angels, but I'm told that's wrong, that post women, men and angels is almost like being a kind of post trauma, like we can't really talk about it. And to the extent that's true, I think that's really unfortunate, and something really needs to be done about that. And actually, when I was an order convener, I no longer have that scope, but I didn't use it when I was. I had a few times wondered, for example, about having a big order weekend on gender. Or I think Parami and I might have talked once, or I talked with 1 or 2 people about maybe the men's and women's, I mean, this was in the UK and Ireland, but it could be done worldwide. First of all, have single-sex discussions on gender, and then all meet together. But I feel that it's really important that we can discuss openly without sensitivity or without oversensitivity. And I know I've found quite a lot of women and men would like that, and I think this is quite important actually under this particular topic. So I'll hastily move on. Oh, actually, there is one thing really important here. One thing really important here, actually, about a unified order. That is internationality. Quite often, people feel, I've seen it, that when they go beyond being a beginner at a centre, maybe go on an international retreat, or I met somebody, I think in Essen recently, who had been on a young person's retreat at Metta Vihara, and they kind of said, now they got an idea of what Triratna was. It's very moving, very, very moving. And so this internationality, both to encourage people to go, obviously to meet people from other centres, well actually first of all just in the UK, just other centres. And then internationality, and of course India. India is so important that this is not an optional extra, that people at our centres as part of our Triratna culture come to know about India and our movement in India. There's a lot to it, isn't there? There's a lot to our Triratna culture, and there's a lot, I think, that one needs to do at a centre to, almost like a checklist, that are we getting this across? Because the inspiration and the vision that people get from this is really huge. The dimensions of the India connection, for example, are huge. Okay, so moving on now, the next one is, well, this is critical ecumenicism. I think originally it was ecumenicism, and then Bhante added critical. Now, looking in the dictionary last night, there's ecumenicism, there's ecumenism, and there's ecumenicalism. And actually all of them are connected with Christianity. So as has been pointed out, in a way, this word, we need to accept that Bhante has taken this word and he's given this word sort of his own meaning in a Buddhist context, or it comes from the Christian context, which means like Christian unity, a single Christian church, or cooperation between the Christian religious groups. And Bhante's put this into a Buddhist context. Slightly problematic word, but definitely Bhante has decided to keep the word, so we can use it, and we are using it. So I'm going to need to say less about the next couple, so that's good because of time running on. At the same time, what I want to say here, this approach of critical ecumenicism requires a great deal of knowledge and clarity, and it requires that order members study Bhante's teaching deeply and thoroughly. And in this connection, the Complete Works project, I think, is going to be very helpful. So here a question for us will be, do order members teaching at our centres read and study Bhante enough? And another question that I've sometimes thought of when I have visited centres, are Bhante's and order members' books clearly enough signposted in our bookshops, especially for beginners? And I have been in situations a few times where beginners seem quite confused, and they're asking, well, what do you recommend that I read? And you're kind of looking at a bookshelf, and there's Pema Chodron, very good Pema Chodron, but it's not what they need really. And so probably at your centre you've taken that into account, but that's important, I would have thought. There's lots that could be said here. Just one thing I thought I'd mention. The recent greater emphasis on the Pali Canon, which is no doubt important. And the question could be, at our centres, have we gone far enough in making sure there's a very clear message of the fundamental, that we're based on the fundamental sort of early teachings of the Buddha? At the same time, one could ask, could we sometimes go too far and lose something in the spirit or even presentation of our centres of the magic, not that hasn't got its magic, but also the magic of the Mahayana and Vajrayana? So that could be something to consider about under the heading of critical ecumenicism. So now moving on to the importance of spiritual friendship. So clearly here we want people at our centres to get a sense that they're coming into spiritual community. It's not, as soon as possible we would like them to understand that it's not an adult education. They've not come on, the courses are not like courses like an adult education course. Presumably, preferably as soon as they come in, they get a sense this is different. They're participating in a community. And they need to learn that some of the basic ideas here, actually views are important all the way through. So some of the views here, we might ask, is Bante's teaching on the individual, the group and the spiritual community sufficiently promoted and clear enough? And in terms of friendship, an understanding of both horizontal and vertical friendship. So vertical friendship would be very important in terms of maybe pseudo-egalitarianism. Horizontal friendship would be very important, for example, in terms of some Buddhist groups actually emphasizing more relationship with the teacher. And I would have thought that sexual ethics are relevant here. And in fact, I'm aware that at the ECA, this is one of the issues that sort of led to looking at the culture of centres, because in a way trying to get a bigger picture rather than just looking at kind of what are they called, guidelines or rules, looking at what is the culture of our, not that they may have a part to play, of course, but also looking at the culture of a centre. Okay, so now moving on to number 5, team-based right livelihood. So obviously a big question here is going to be, what is the future of team-based right livelihood post-Windhorse? Although there is some remnants of Windhorse, positive remnants I believe of Windhorse left. There are some shops there, and there is the Windhorse Trust and so on. But arguably, and I'm sure that Bhante would argue, it's very important that we think positively and creatively about team-based right livelihood and continue to see this as one of our 6 emphases. There's a question I even don't know exactly how much is there at the moment since Windhorse closed down. And also, what is the wider ramifications of this? Of course, what is the wider ramifications of this emphasis? Of course, under team-based right livelihood, there are our centre teams, aren't there? These are very important examples of team-based right livelihood. I have wondered about the place of social action and the new society, and where does this fit in terms of the emphases? Bhante has always taught, the Buddha has always taught, that conditions matter so much, and that's one of the reasons why right livelihood is so important. And it's a matter not just of conditions for Dharma practice, but of transforming the world. So, if there was anything, if there was ever another emphasis that one could argue there might be, it could be something about transformation of world. But I know that Bhante is not minded to add another emphasis. I did have a brief conversation with Bhante about this about a year ago. And I think he felt it could be fitted in under team-based right livelihood. So I don't know whether really almost this needs to be slightly expanded, what it means, but I was thinking, well, where does things like the activism of Buddhist Action Month fit in? Is that a distinctive emphasis? Or is that just something that we do? Is that important? Is that something, how do we see that at our centres? Our engagement with the world, such as poverty, environment, causes of war. is that something we feel is important? Or would we think that if we didn't have that, that would be okay because we'd have, you know, all these other things that are in this are more explicit or are made explicit? That's the question. So now coming on to number 6, the spiritual importance of the arts. I hope I haven't missed one. No. Okay, so number 6. Yes, I'm going to say the least about this one, partly because there's going to be Bante's birthday area, what is it? Yeah, our big gathering. It's a gathering, isn't it? Bante's gathering next weekend is going to be dedicated to the arts. And of course, here, it is specifically Bante's vision of the arts, or Bante's explication of a vision of the arts. In the end, it's a universal vision. It's not sort of like Bante's sort of hasn't made it up. He's kind of articulated how the place of the arts in spiritual life. So the question here would be for the arts, not only what we might be able to do at our centres, and I imagine that this is one that it is quite easy to be overlooked because we have so much to do at our centres. Also, do we have the people who are able to, the order members and maybe, and no doubt mitras, who can sort of make this happen? It could get overlooked. Well, if it got overlooked, at least I guess it would be really important that that people know about this. That when people come along, it's kind of in evidence somehow. So one could think about that. And in particular, what is meant here by the arts? What is meant by the arts? Because people have different criteria. What are the arts? And why are they important in this context? And how can one engage with them? So that's all I'm going to say here. And I've come to the end. I have got the 15 that Bante wrote down all those years ago. So I don't know whether you'd be interested to hear the 15. Would you be? I think it's important to say that they are jottings. It's very interesting going through, it was a great privilege and fascinating going through Bante's box with him, because he's not able to read. I have to go into the box and kind of give him an idea of what's there, and we dip. And in terms of the complete works, I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, there are, I'll just say this as an aside, there are articles, there are lectures coming out that have never been seen, and Bante said, oh yeah, that should be in the complete works. We came across, this is quite irrelevant, but I'll tell you. We came across last week an interview that Bante gave in 1958, I think it is, with an American journalist responding to questions about Buddhism in America. And it's probably the first time Bante kind of spoke to a Westerner about, you know, Buddhism in the West. That will probably make itself into the complete works, or certainly will appear sometime. So we came across this page in a file, and I'll read them through. So the first one is emphasis on Sangha. That's to say, Bante's put, i.e. horizontal as well as vertical. And he put especially friendships. And secondly, centrality of going for refuge. Thirdly, plurality of relationships, not just sexual. Fourthly, especially positive relation to parents. I think that especially probably relates to plurality of relationships. So he's saying especially the positive relationship to parents. Fifthly, recourse to Western culture. Sixthly, non-exoticism. Seventhly, not to mix Buddhism, not with Christianity, or Hinduism. Brackets, critical attitude. Sorry? What was what?
With what?
Not to mix it with Christianity. He'd written Christianity. Not to mix with Christianity or Hinduism. Brackets, critical attitude. Eighthly, ecumenical and non-denominational. Dash, accept whole, underlined, Buddhist tradition. Ninthly,
It's not accept, what accept?
accept. Accept.
A bit slower.
Yes, I can go a bit slower. So eighthly, ecumenical and non-denominational. Accept whole of the Buddhist tradition. Ninthly, single sex. 10th, neither lay nor monastic. Full stop, one ordination. 11th, importance of arts.
Separate from culture.
Yeah, it is actually, that's interesting. I hadn't noticed that. But yeah, you could make sense of that. 12th, anti-family. So I did have a little exchange with Bhante about that, so I'll say something about that. So yes, a bit of a bombshell there. But I did have a chat with Bhante about that. I mentioned I was going to read this out. He didn't tell me not to. Although he didn't say, jolly good, go ahead either. So we come to some interesting and less sort of controversial ones for the last three. 13th, vegetarian. Yeah, that's really interesting. 14th, liquor. So obviously that's the Indian word for alcohol. That's it. He's been in his Indian mode. Alcohol. Again, I think that's something for us to include in our discussions about the culture of Triratna centres. And 15th, emphasis on sutras. Sutras. That's all it says. I mean here, he's not. I suppose it's to do with going back to the word of the Buddha, isn't it? But he's not saying just Pali. He's just saying the sutras.
Do you know when he jotted these?
No idea. And with a lot of the papers, they're undated. A lot. The majority of what we're finding are not dated. What we can usually find out, and it would be clear in this case, when we're looking into the boxes, whether they, for example, go back to India, or sometimes you can date it by the paper, the handwriting, the typewriter, but actually the majority is not dated, and certainly this is not. It could be the 90s, it could be the 80s.
What's the heading of the paper?
It is the 15 distinctive features of the FWO.
So the FWO, it is the FWO.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if you were being a little bit scholarly, the fact he uses the word liquor suggests to me it's earlier rather than later, but not very early. But that's something somebody could think about. Just about the anti-family, I mean, actually, you can work it out, but I did say to Chandradasa beforehand, and he said, can this go out to everybody? I mean, I've got no idea about the whole thing and who would be interested and so on, but I did say that, there's something at the end. And so, I mean, basically, you can probably guess what Bhante said about anti-family, just very sensibly, without showing in the slightest bit of worry, and why should he? In fact, he said, well, it's about the individual. Basically, a spiritual movement is about individuals. And it's not about groups. So I think that's the case. But make of it what you will. I will not give any further gloss on that. And we've come to 11:30, and that's my presentation in advance of the groups.